Welcome. This is another podcast in the Tech Career for Life series. My guest today is Dr. Neil Roodyn. I've known Neil for decades in and around the local developer community and as a fellow member of the Microsoft Regional Director Program. He has worked in the industry for a long time, and I liked the quote he had on his website that said, "A career in technology is often told as a story about technology, but looking back, it turns out to have been a story about people all along." So, welcome, Dr. Neil.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be here.
Indeed. So, what I do with everyone, tell me, how did you come to get involved in technology in the first place?
Yeah, I guess as a kid, I was always quite nerdy. I was incredibly fortunate. My father was a biochemist and was just...
Yeah, I remember you said he was a scientist. Yeah,
yeah, that's right. And he was very nerdy as well. And he was into everything, right? Like he, as the first, digital calculator that came out, he had to have, he was that kind of person. And a lot of his work in terms of experimental was running, hundreds of thousands of experiments and doing statistical analysis. And so mathematics is kind of important at that level, and calculators and calculations. So I guess it was 78, he bought home a Commodore PET, the first ever Commodore PET machine. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the future, right? Like, I'm going to be part of this future. And it kind of coincided with all kinds of other things that were going on in that era, right? Like Star Wars was coming out. There was more in terms of kind of science fiction in my mind. I guess I was of that age that I was starting to read a lot of science fiction. There was that whole Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy radio show that was being broadcast. So a lot of things were kind of culminating at the same time that were just like candy for the nerd, right? And so I got into playing with this Commodore PET, and it was, incredible as an experience in that I could create things. And, I had like 4K of RAM, but I could make a little program that moved something around the screen or, could answer questions. I remember being enamored by creating, an ELIZA-like type application. For those that don't know, ELIZA is kind of this... It says, "Oh, how are you feeling today, Greg?" And then you say, "Oh, I'm doing okay." "Oh, how do you feel about that?" And then it has a predefined set of responses that just appear like a psychologist or someone doing, therapy for you, but it's very simple. And I remember doing that and tricking my brother into thinking, we had created something amazing. He's younger than me. And so, that kind of led into learning to program and geeking out with that as a machine with BASIC and assembly. I had to learn little tricks that I could do in assembly, and a lot of those days was literally poking things into memory.
Poking values into locations.
And then along came the Commodore 64 a few years after that, and that was like this whole new world of color and sprites, and I could start building games and playing games. So that opened up that whole, I guess, world for me, which I thought was exciting. And I guess I also thought I can create things here, right? Like I can make my own things. I can make my own future. I can make whatever I want. And so, although probably if I was to open any of those programs now, I would, be embarrassed. But at the time, it was exciting. And so that's what I was doing as a kid and then as a teenager. And then I guess I fell into, and it was interesting because at school in those days, computers wasn't really a thing you could do as a career, right? Like it wasn't considered serious. And I remember at school, being asked, "Oh, what do you want to do for your O-levels? What do you want to do for your career?" O-levels were kind of the exams we did at 16. And they said, and I said, "Oh, I want to work with computers. I'm going to program." And they were like, no, You're too intelligent to do that. You're going to do math, physics, chemistry,
Not your
biology,
thing.
all the sciences. You're a nerd. You're going to do physics. You're going to do maths. I was like, no, I want to program computers. And so, I did my O levels, and then I really wanted to do more in computers for my A levels, which was what you do when you're 18. And I was just told no. It was a no-go zone. It was like, oh no, computers are for stupid kids. It's like, computers is data entry, basically, as far as they were concerned in those days.
Yeah. When I first went to University of Queensland at the time, of course, there were no IT or computer science type subjects, really. I mean, and it was always done partially as part of science, but it was kind of like, I don't know, an add-on, and then there were the business people who did, bits of that stuff as well. But yeah, the idea of an actual computer science degree or something, that was...
Oh, it was non-existent.
No such
and it was
concept.
Really, if you wanted to get into computers, it was maths was your way in, probably, or maybe physics. But maths...
Yeah, in fact, when I look back at the period I worked at QUT at the university, most of the people who were the lecturers at the time had come from completely different backgrounds. Like the dean was an astronomer.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
And so on. So, people had come from very different backgrounds. And this is in an IT faculty.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that was the 80s, was like people were starting to invent this concept of computer science, right? And it really didn't exist until the end of the 80s. But I was already like, I'm into this, right? I'm going to get 286, I'm going to get, 386, I'm going to work it out, and I'm going to start programming it. And I was very fortunate on many levels in, I guess life is a series of luck and success and unluck and failure. But yeah, I mean, if I focus on the lucky things, one thing that happened was I fell in with a guy who had founded a company to build software for private investors. And him and his partner, his business partner was the coder, had kind of got it so far, but then they had a disagreement. It didn't work out. His business partner was leaving the country, and so this guy was left holding essentially the IP and the idea, but no ability to deliver it. And I found him, and he found me. I can't even remember how. And I said, "Oh, I'm keen." Like, said, give me the code that this guy has started. And I looked through. It was like, hundreds of lines of C code. And it was literally, I was given a printout of the C code. And I started going through it, and I started thinking, I could do something with this. I could make this into an application. And at the time we were reading, so in order to get stock quotes, we got 20-minute delay stock quotes off a TV card that we plugged into a PC. I don't know if you remember teletext or CFAX or any of those.
Very, very much so. Actually, I did. I did some work in when I was doing a master's. I actually did some stuff with BBC. Had a whole lot of teletext related stuff. And,
So we plugged those cards into a 286 or a 386, and you could start scraping out 20-minute delay stock prices, and then you could start building your portfolio and managing it and looking at, your profit and loss over time. And so that's what I built. And we created a company, Updata, and started selling it. It was fantastic. You start building a thing, and then real people start using it. And you see this kind of thing that started off very fuzzy, turning into something a lot richer. And then Windows 3 and 3.1 came out, and it was kind of like, we have to make this work on Windows.
When certainly some of the tooling there, certainly I think the one that had one of the biggest impacts on me was when they released VB, and it was mostly because I think prior to VB, people forget now how much work it was just to build in C, for example.
We did everything in C. Like, we would make our own menus. We would
just to put like a thing on the screen with a button, was like enormous amounts of work.
Well, I think what Windows started to do as it matured, and it certainly didn't have it in Windows 1 very well, but it started to, by Windows 3, have a much better GDI UI framework that you could go, I want a button here, I want it this size, I want this text on it, and start defining how you could reuse those components and define menus and how things worked. And yes, it was all still in C, C++, and that was kind of my big innovation, was I'm going to take all this C code and make it into classes. And so, in the normal evolution of things, it became C with classes before it became object-oriented C++. And so, yeah, that was, an adventure I went on, which was...
Listen, one interesting question. One of the things, and I share the same thing, was this feeling where you could suddenly create things and they would do things and so on. Did you have interests outside of technology where you had hobbies that were creating things or anything like that, or was it straight into IT?
Yeah, I had plenty, and some were complete catastrophes. I mean, as a nerd kid, I was always into kind of fantasy and sci-fi, and so Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games and board games, and so a lot of that got codified in various good and bad ways that didn't turn into anything. And I had ideas about creating like multi-user board games on the Commodore 64 that would kind of represent different things on the board. And I created a few and played a few with friends, but they were always a bit crap, essentially. Like, they weren't fantastic, polished products. They were things to play around with.
Listen, you've also, over the years, you've spent some time in the large corporates like Microsoft and things like that, and a lot of time in sort of smaller companies and things. What's your take at the moment on where you think, if you were doing things longer term, what's your feeling on the big company versus little company situation?
I think they're different, and there's different places for them in the ecosystem, and there's specializations and niches that you're never going to build a huge trillion-dollar business out of. And you can focus on little niches or single products and stay small, stay lean. You could be one person, you could be 10 people, you could be 100 people. But then there's opportunity spaces to create things that sell to billions of people. And you can't do that at scale with 10 people in a room, right? Or 10 people distributed around the world even. You need an engine to deliver that. And so I think, you're correct. One of the things I've done is bounce between being one guy working with a business person and building a business, and that business updated when I left. I think there were like 6 developers in the company. And so I watched that growth. And then I've gone into huge organizations where, a small team is a few hundred developers. And they're really, Microsoft's, Intel's, they're kind of businesses of businesses. And I think that's something a lot of people don't really grok or get their head around.
Yeah, it's not like it's one big single lump. Yeah.
You go, oh, Microsoft did this. Well, Microsoft didn't do anything. Xbox might have done that, or Windows might have done that, or Office might have done that. But they're like multiple. They're different businesses, and they operate as different businesses, on many levels. Although they're under this one brand, and I think that's something that is hard for, unless you've experienced it or gone and spent time. It's hard for people to get their head around the fact that there is no Google, there is no Microsoft, there is no Amazon. There's lots of businesses within those businesses that make up that brand and deliver lots of products. I also think that at that scale of, if you're at Microsoft scale, a lot of businesses that people are very happy running as businesses and they're profitable just don't make any sense to a company of that scale. There's a great speech by Steve Jobs actually around like how you can make decisions, but how are you going to make a product that sells and makes $1 billion profit every year? And if you don't do that, then you're not Apple ready, right? And so there's kind of this different level of thinking. If you want to be, or you're already in that $1 trillion game, you have to think just a lot bigger. If you're in the, happily making a few $1,000s profit a year, or a few $100,000 profit a year, or even a few, small millions, you don't need to be that big. I think the interesting thing that is, obviously a lot of people are talking about now, and how does this shift? And I'm not sure that it actually does over time, but certainly it's the buzz at the moment. And, I don't know how far have we made it in, like 10 minutes, and we haven't said AI yet. So
I haven't said the word AI, yeah.
But, is this kind of belief that it's going to change everything? I'm not sure it is. I think, creativity and ideas and coming up with new ways of doing things still requires humans, and still requires that kind of sideways thinking. And one things you mentioned earlier is coming at things from different disciplines is often what leads to those innovations.
Completely. It's one of the things that always frustrates me. If I look at things like the grants councils and so on in the country, the approach always seems to be to find something that's already sort of working, and then that's what we invest in. But they never want to invest in sort of blue sky things, and yet every time there's something significant in science, it's something out of left field that wasn't necessarily on the horizon.
It's a risk aversion, I think, and real innovation requires the acceptance that many things will fail. And I know I've been involved in many things that haven't panned out to be incredibly successful, but they were great ideas and they create building blocks for the next level, right? So I think it's still, I still look back on every single one of those failures with pride, because they became a building block for what came next, right? Like, I worked on neural net stuff in the 90s. Sure, it was a little bit of a, let's call it an AI summer before another AI winter.
Yeah.
And people were, looking at doing things that were interesting, and we did a few projects for different customers that used neural nets, were intelligent. They're trivial now, but they created the building blocks. If that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be where we are now.
We wouldn't be where we are. So listen, one of the things you did along the way, obviously, is a doctorate. And did you have thoughts about being involved in academia at all? Or was this just an interest to do this? Or
yeah, I think to some degree it was an expectation of my parents that I would be in academia, and I'm a huge disappointment that all I do is play with computers all day. It wasn't necessarily that forced by my parents. Things happen. The PhD happened really because I was looking for documentation, things that had been written down. I was building my third real-time system, and I was like, I can't be the only one doing this. This must be documented. These architectures must be well defined. Like, where do I go and find out? And a friend of mine introduced me to a professor at University College London, and I sat down and had a coffee with him. And then I met someone at Imperial College in London and had a coffee with them. And it was like, we can't find anything. Like, there's no one has documented in clear way good architectures for distributed real-time systems. I'm like, okay. And then the guy at UCL, the professor at UCL, said, well, why don't you write it down? Like, let's create a paper. So I created a paper, and that's kind of the first journey into doing a PhD, right? Is you do a paper, you present it at, I can't even remember where I presented it, one of the big conferences, and you get a lot of questions that you can't answer because people are way smarter than you. And then you go away and think more about it, and then you write another paper. And 2 years later, I had a PhD thesis. Really,
which is great. You're able to dedicate the time for that, because I know at the stage I started mine, the completion rate was bad. For people locally, it was something like about 5 or 6%
Yeah.
of people who started actually completed. But the worst thing was for part-time ones,
Yeah.
it was like 2 or 3%. And I remember when I started to do it, I remember the dean telling me that, look, part-time PhDs simply don't work. Yeah, that was his contention. And I think I nearly stopped myself, several times along the way. But ironically, it was just the fact that I told him I would, and I was determined to keep going. But look, I think the problem there was that as an educational experience, it was lacking, in terms of how things worked at the time. Nowadays, it's a lot better where people, I think if they get latched onto projects that have a longer term future and carve out some aspect of it for themselves and so on, that sort of thing, generally seems to lead to much better outcomes nowadays. But so did you end up having any thought about just spending time in academia?
I did, and in various stints, I've done teaching and guest lectures at various universities, and I do enjoy it. Like, I absolutely enjoy it. I think the challenge that I see, and I have applied in the past for lecturer roles at universities, but I think the challenge is all the bureaucracy and mess that goes along with it in these large institutions means that it's actually very hard to focus on doing what you really want to do, which is educate people. There's all these other constraints around, and I guess my background in terms of education is much less constrained, more freeform, in that I like people to learn by exploring. And that's very much frowned upon in this kind of world of, oh, everything has to follow these paths or these patterns, and this is what we allow, and this is what we don't allow, and no, you can't do that. And also I think there's also now a huge challenge with measuring individual, and it's fair because that's kind of what you're doing, but measuring individual contribution for a person and trying to validate that it's that person and they didn't steal the idea. And yet every idea is in some way stolen from a previous idea, right?
Like, it's all was based on something else.
Yeah. And then I think combine that with your previous comment about low risk, right? Like, people want stuff that is always going to succeed, but that's not how innovation works. And so you need, it's very valid to start a PhD with a thesis that's completely wrong, right?
Yes.
And go ahead and discover that it's wrong, document that it's wrong,
I might add, really valuable.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody explores something and then comes to the conclusion, that sounded promising and comes to a conclusion that it simply isn't, people don't seem to understand that that's like super valuable, that sort of thing. And I think the other one people often don't get with science is that they think scientists feel bad if something they've done is proven wrong, and and you just think, that a real scientist looks at that and just goes, wow, that's something I can now explore.
Now I know the truth, I'll move on. Yes, although the current truth is then, the future's fiction. And that's how it keeps building. And I think that's fine. But it is hard for, I guess, university organizations who are investing in this and want to validate the success rate of their research and the work they're doing, with numbers, because that's what they're always trying to do, because they're trying to run like a business. And I think this is, again, something that shifted in the 70s and 80s.
The self-funding of universities, I think is the big thing. I loved being there, but the thing I loved was more the working with students on project work and things like that, just absolutely loved it to death. But the bureaucracy was just overwhelming.
And I'm not
because it stops you doing anything that you really want to do.
And I'm not a person that takes instructions very well.
So listen, do you plan to stay in technology to retirement?
Yeah, probably. I mean,
Or what does retirement mean
yeah,
to
I
you?
mean that's a funny one too because I've tried to retire 3 times and failed each time. Um, I think that again, I've been incredibly fortunate in various adventures I've gone on. Some have been way more successful than I ever expected, and some have been incredible catastrophes, and that's okay, and that's part of the journey.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I guess I'm just such a nerd. I can't imagine there'll be a time that I wouldn't be fiddling, you know, as my mum says, playing with his computer.
Yeah.
Um, and
Do
so,
you, do you think it might change though? Like, I mean, has it suddenly become a massive complex home automation system, or like does the interest end up in, I don't know, something different to what you've been doing with
well, I mean,
different work?
I've built home automation systems for
Hmm.
houses that I've lived in and enjoyed doing that, and I'll probably do it again. I don't, I think I just see computers and software as a tool to get outcomes, um,
Hmm.
and I'll continue doing that. And if at some point in the future I decide that I want to re-landscape my garden, then I may well end up building software to do that as well, right? And manage all the different plant schedules and all the rest of it.
Totally.
And
Yeah,
so I
I
can't, I
often
can't
look at.
imagine
I
a
grew
time
up.
where I wouldn't use it. That's kind of the thing.
I grew up loving model railways and things like that. And one of the things I always look at is even the most elaborate model railways nowadays
Oh my goodness, yeah.
still are very repetitive in how all the things work. And I often look at these things and think, wouldn't it just be fun to, design a class for, every single thing that interacts and then just sit back and watch what happens.
Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah,
people have done this too. Like, I'm sure,
yeah.
that's a very nerdy culture as well, that whole model railway culture.
Mm.
I'd be shocked if someone hasn't built like a model
Yeah,
railway
I just don't
simulator.
tend to get to see them. So yeah,
Yeah.
I do think and every one of these things there's something you could sort of run off and start to explore. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one things COVID did is give me time to explore other things that I hadn't been doing for a while.
Hmm.
Partly because I had also, you know, over the last, before COVID happened, over the year before, I had really stopped traveling as much. So stop living out of a suitcase suddenly meant I had all this other time because I'm not sitting on airplanes the whole time.
Yeah.
And I got back into more creative things, doing drawing and painting and creative
Hmm.
writing. And again, okay, the painting is much more physical, and I love just that kind of physicality of actual, paint on a canvas. And that's probably not going to get computerized in any way. But writing, absolutely,
Hmm.
like the last few books, and I've got, I don't know how many unfinished books now as I keep coming up with new ideas. I'm doing it all in Markdown.
Yeah.
I'm not
Almost
opening Word
everything I write
anymore.
now.
Yeah.
Almost everything I write now is in Markdown.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so and it just makes it easy to edit. It makes it easy to review. It makes it easy to
Source
publish.
control.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hey,
Um,
so listen, the last sort of topic I really want to just touch on is that if you was talking to someone who had just, I don't know, finished a degree or something at the moment and were just wanting to break into the industry, what are your thoughts? Like, what should they do?
Yeah, it's a tough one at the moment because everyone's saying, "Oh, there will be no software development. Everyone's just going to call the
Hmm.
AI." But I don't think that's strictly true. And
No.
and this is a real thing that I'm doing on a regular basis. I'm talking to students and graduates and interns, almost weekly at the moment. I'm currently mentoring a couple of students as well.
Hmm.
I think the real thing is ideas. And at some point, you can, create a prototype, you can get LLMs to take you a lot of the way there, but you still need to guide them, you still need to give them direction, you still need to correct them and tell them where they're wrong and get, fixes. Now, maybe you're not looking as much code as you used to. Maybe you're looking at, 10% of the code and The reality is, in a lot of software and a lot of things you build, a lot of it's very boilerplate anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
take this thing from the database and turn it into a thing that I can see on the screen. And,
How much time do you think they should spend in, I don't know, producing things that are visible, so that they can show people that they can produce things that are visible?
Yeah, I mean, I think building a portfolio is something I encourage everyone to do. And in fact, even with the people that I mentor that are, let's call them grown-ups, but have been in career for 10, 20, 30 years, I say the most important thing you can do is set yourself goals for the year and then track how you're achieving towards that goal. And if you want to pivot, that's fine. If you get a third of the way in or half the way into the year and you say, my goal was wrong, that's okay. Reset your goal and carry on capturing your achievements. But month by month, capture what you have done, what you have delivered. If you've got URLs, post them in there. If you've got documents, add them. Build a portfolio of everything you do through your career, and it doesn't just have to be work. It can be stuff you're doing at home, hobby projects.
Sure.
Lots of people have hobby
But
projects.
what about things like contributions to open source projects and things like
That should
that?
go in there too. I mean, I think open source is interesting in that there's a lot of open source projects that are libraries that you go, oh, I don't want to have to build that. Let me grab that library that does this
Yeah.
thing. But actually, you don't need most of what that library does. You need 20% of what's in that
Yeah.
library. Well, now, is it easier to, let's call it, use your agentic persona to create that 20% versus being dependent on a third-party library, right? And I think there's a lot of questions around. There are definitely some open source projects that are completely killer, and I wouldn't even bother going and rewriting them. I'd just be like, no, I can use that, I can support it. If I find something wrong with it, I can create a PR and help them fix it. And that's great. But I think there's a lot of much smaller ones that you could look at and go, is this really does it really have a valid existence going forward if someone could vibe code the piece they need very quickly?
I did like the SQL Server product team just released their new client. And it was interesting that one of the main things they did was remove libraries that they had dependencies on, like web UI ones and things that they're just going, what on earth is all of that being pulled into our project for? And no doubt it was because somebody needed a few methods or something from some massive library, and they just pulled the whole library in. Yes.
Well, this is kind of the failing in the software reuse concept is that, sure, you're reusing software from somewhere else, but you're also dragging a whole bunch of other stuff you're not needing into it, right? And so a lot of software is bloated, not because the architecture is bloated, but because they're pulling in a lot of libraries that have things that are never used in that piece of software. They just needed one piece of it and they pull the whole thing in. And so, I definitely think there's opportunities to slim down, optimize products.
It does, I must admit, reminiscing, it does make me laugh when I look at these things nowadays. And some of the earlier HP 3000s I worked on, where they had 64K of memory, and they'd have like 32 users attached to it.
Yes.
And,
I mean, I think the infinite memory, infinite hard drive problem, infinite compute problem is not helping us at all. Like, people that don't know how to optimize, and going back to your question, what would I say to someone starting out? Well, it's probably the same I'd say to anyone really in this industry: is learn how, as Hanselman says, learn how to drive stick, learn how to change your oil, learn how to change tires, right? Like, learn the fundamentals, so that when you do get your piece of software spat out at the end and it runs slowly, you know what to do about it, and you know where to look in order to make it run faster, or use less memory, or use less hard drive.
But it also means when you see obscure error messages and things that you have some clue as to what on earth it's talking about. Yes.
Yeah, although, I mean, if you think back at your history, certainly when I look back at my history and I look like, error messages I used to get on 390 series, like, They were completely meaningless numbers, right? And you'd have to look them
Oh,
up.
I did a blog post the other day about what I think were probably the most meaningless error messages or misleading ones. And
Well, but
my
I mean, in those
favorite.
days, they were literally just a number. You'd have to go to a
Oh yeah, yeah,
manual
yeah.
and look up that
Absolutely.
number.
It's like here's a number, and but my favorite one were the ones that led people down the wrong path. Like in VB, there was a common error message that had come up that says out of memory.
Right.
And I cannot tell you how many people try to just keep jamming memory into machines to sort it out. But what it was actually telling you is that, there used to be this DLL and you moved it somewhere else.
Right.
And now, surely the only reason I can't load a DLL is that there's not enough memory.
Yeah.
And you think, yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, and that was actually a Windows problem, not necessarily a VB problem.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
we
yeah.
just
Or just a
surfaced it
file
as-
gone missing or
yeah.
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
absolutely crazy stuff. Hey, listen, but that pretty much brings us up to time. Is there anything people are going to see you around the town or around the world coming up?
So what I'm doing is I'm going to create a series of blog posts on things I've learned about working with teams at scale globally. I think one thing
Excellent.
that is interesting to me now is, post-COVID, there is no reason for software developers, unless you're working on some specific piece of hardware or something, but if you're just literally doing software, there's no reason to be co-located anymore. And technologies are just so good now for remote working, remote collaboration, and global collaboration. And actually, there's a lot of benefits to that. And so what I'm doing is a series of blog posts as to how to use that as a superpower, how to turn that to your advantage as we move into this new digital era. I think there's a lot of the current world thinking is still stuck in industrial factory era
Yeah.
world where you go to the factory to do the work. There's no reason.
Although
for
it's
someone-
interesting, I was listening to a Prof G podcast the other day, and one of the things he was saying is it was just an interesting point. He thinks that having everyone working from home now has sort of like slightly emotionally or socially stunted the growth, particularly of a whole lot of young guys. And
that's interesting. I mean,
kind
I
of a
think
fascinating thought, really.
I think part of that is that we haven't fully entered the digital era yet.
Yeah.
And so I think we're in this transition between industrial era and digital era. We're still dragging a lot of industrial era thinking and not fully migrated into digital era. One things I would say that is interesting to me is that if you can work remotely, then your community that you live with, whether you're in a suburb of a city or in a village or a town somewhere, actually starts to become more important. And isn't that a good thing? That the people that live around you are now your real community, not necessarily the office that you travel an hour and a half into. Is kind
I
of
must
your
admit,
work
I don't
community,
miss going into the city in the slightest. And so,
And so I think that shift has to happen, right? Like, and it's a big cultural shift for a lot of people, and it's a big mental shift. And for a lot of corporations, it's very difficult because they've invested
but it's
hundreds of
even
millions
just
of dollars.
practical for the city. I mean,
Yeah.
they keep trying to build more and more freeways to get more and more cars in and out of them. I mean, the only way you can ever fix the traffic is stop people going there.
Yeah, we know how this ends. We've been to LA, right? Like, this is not going to end well. Like,
No.
we don't know. Not every city needs to be like LA or Jakarta, right? Like these places are nuts, and no one actually wants to live there. They live there because of the work. Well, if the work is not needed there anymore, then you don't need to be there to do the work. We can actually have a much more sensible lifestyle. That's probably healthier for humans.
Brings us to time, Neil. So, listen, thank you so very much for being involved today.
No, thank you, Greg. Good to speak again.
Indeed. Awesome. Thanks.